A Christmas dinner. Hare soup, boiled turbot, roast beef, boiled turkey, plum pudding, mashed potatoes, broccoli, mince pies, raspberry trifle, biscuits, cheese, celery, grapes, bananas, walnuts, dessert biscuits, French sweets, and chocolate. If some of our readers think that we are giving a menu far beyond what a small income can afford, to such we say, Christmas comes but once a year, and when it comes, bring good cheer. But a very good dinner can be got by omitting some of the items. For instance, those who have only one servant might leave out the fish and the trifle. Hello, my name's Gavin. This is Genre Books. I have no Christmas pulp magazine, but I've got the very next best thing. Christmas Past, a selection of Victorian magazines. I finished this book last week. It took a little longer than I was expecting, although the writing is incredibly small, so each page took longer to get through than I had been anticipating, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And that there are lots of illustrations certainly helps speed the process along. I like the fact that they've issued the traditional angel or star on top of the Christmas tree, 4 flags representing the Union. This collection does run the gamut from the sublime to the ridiculous and includes articles and stories from the Infants magazine, Little Folks, Castle's Family magazine, The Woman at Home, The Friendly Visitor, The Strand, and Ladies' Realm. I think the selections are from 1868 to 1899, so the later years of the Victorian era. Some of the Christmas traditions that we now have are within living memory here, but still fairly well ensconced. Dickens' Christmas Carol is the high watermark that people are aspiring to from a literary perspective. The Christmas tree is alluded to a lot and had only been a feature for between sort of 30 and 60 years when these stories and articles are produced. But it really seems to have caught on in a big way, the Christmas tree, very quickly. I am going to whiz through the contents of this book and pause briefly to discuss a particular story or what I found out about some of the writers. The brief excerpts at the beginning from the Infants magazine are a couple of Christmas poems aimed very much at that target demographic. The Little Folks magazine has there's a couple of stories. There's the story of a Christmas tree and Plessy's Christmas Eve. The story of a Christmas tree is a very sentimental tale about 2 children not inordinately well off, but relatively to some nearby families comfortably off, saving their money and foregoing some of their Christmas treats in order to provide a much more pleasant Christmas for a family down at heel in the local community. There is a continuing theme in this book: families who are in dire straits, in various levels of poverty or distress, being alleviated either from the charity of others or from some seemingly divine intervention. It is unapologetically sentimental and pulling on the heartstrings, and to a large extent in these stories it works. I would say don't expect many surprises from these tales. they basically deliver what you are expecting them to. But, the alternative is a family undergoing horrible poverty and having a terrible Christmas. So it's great to read the stories as they turn out. What we also have in some of these magazine articles is a guide to how to make your own Christmas. And we begin with an article in Little Folks called Christmas and New Year Presents, talking about what presents children can make for the adults. In this first article, there is a Christmas post office being suggested to be set up in the home. Basically a play area set up to look like a post office. I remember this happening at primary school, kindergarten. So this is a tradition that seems to have sort of survived at least into the late 70s, early 80s. So I do wonder how long it continued after that. There is the description of Yule traps, which a tradition consisting in hiding one present inside another, disguising it in such a manner as to test the cleverness of the receiver not a little in finding it out. For example, a soft pair of kid gloves can be rolled up and secured in a large Spanish walnut, previously emptied, and the two halves gummed together. A little pot of damson cheese has been found to have the preserve dexterously cut away underneath sufficiently to give room for a pot to contain a delicate gold chain or ornament. Some of the suggested gifts to make sound like they could be a little bit ambitious. Papa likes a fretwork writing case for his table, which the boys can make, mounting it neatly on leather and putting in blotting paper afterwards. Anyway, a number of ideas there from A. Strange Butson. But we move on to Castle's Family Magazine. There are no fiction entries for Castle's Family Magazine, but there is a lot of direction of how to conduct a Christmas. One article, How to Give a Children's Party, does give, actually, I'll say a note of caution, many notes of caution throughout the article. It is no means an easy thing to give a successful children's party. It is easy to fill the rooms with eager children and to spread them before unusual and rich food, but the result of this is oftener than not weariness, fatigue, and dissatisfaction to the grown-up people, and discontent, disappointment, and even illness to the children. What can be more ridiculous than to collect together a crowd of children of all ages and dispositions, and to exchange for 5 or 6 hours their well-ventilated nurseries for heated rooms and draughty passages, their simple food for indigestible pastry and sickly unwholesome sweets, their ordinary warm clothing for low-necked sleeveless dresses which leave exposed the most sensitive part of the human frame, the upper part of the arms and the chest, and then allow them to sit up for 2 or 3 hours beyond their usual time for retiring, until the fashionable hour arrives for children's parties to break up, when, worn out with fatigue and excitement, the little ones are carried off to bed. Merry Christmas from Phyllis Brown. Phyllis Brown is a pseudonym and the author of 3 of the articles in the Castle's selection here. Arthur Gay Payne went by the name Phyllis Brown when he was talking about cookery, or in this case, parties. He was also a sports editor. He edited the book The Art of Swimming. He was a sports commentator for The Standard and the Billiard News. He also wrote on cricket and, I'm not sure this is a sport, conjuring. But he was also a writer on cookery. When he was writing on cookery, he went by his female pseudonym Phyllis Brown, and he wrote one of the first ever vegetarian cookbooks. As we might see, this was definitely something he had been asked to do. Some of his recipes are absolutely not vegetarian. Under the name A.G. Payne, he does have an article on catering for children's parties. So after he's dealt with the sheer ridiculousness of the notion of having a party for children, we then go on to discuss what we might feed the little darlings. In one respect, I think it will be found that the children of the present age resemble the children of all ages, viz. In considering the supper the event of the evening. And I think I can safely pass over the tea and coffee part of the business by saying more will take coffee than tea. Now, it will never do to let children make a heavy meal off sweets and pastry, so let each one begin with some cold fowl or cold turkey, or at any rate with some meat sandwiches. And it goes into very exacting description about how to prepare the cold fowl here. First, the cold fowl and turkey. These should be roasted the day before and they should be glazed and ornamented. A very good and simple glaze can be made as follows. Slice an onion, put it into half a pint of water with a little parsley, let it boil for some time and strain it off. Then add a good teaspoonful, or rather more, of Liebig's extract of meat, a little pepper and salt, and dissolve it in about 3/4 of an ounce of gelatin. One yolk of an egg may be added. The extract of meat is quite enough to make of it a nice rich brown colour, although some persons add colouring, which is generally burnt sugar and water and what professionals call blackjack. That, when cold, will of course be a firm jelly. All that is necessary is to paint the cold fowls and turkey, etc. with this when it is nearly cold but not set. This glaze will set almost directly it is put on. Avoid, however, glazing the fowls or turkey on the dish which they will be served up. Have plenty of bright, fresh green parsley and, if possible, a few cut flowers. One of the best accompaniments for cold fowl is cold tongue. If the tongue be a fresh one, it should be glazed like the fowl, but what will be found now to be very good and far cheaper are preserved tongues in tins. Cut the tin neatly round close to the edge and turn it up on the dish. Cut off the top slice with a very sharp knife and surround the rolled tongue with some frilled paper, which had better be tied on with some white cotton. These tinned tongues are decidedly lighter than fresh ones, and a border of thick green parsley outside the frill will improve the appearance of the dish. Sounds scrummy. Lobster salads are very popular. I can't remember children's parties being very much like this, I've got to say. Before we come to the sweets, we will for one moment consider the difficult question of what's best to drink. Plain water is decidedly best. Champagne is expensive and unnecessary, and these days probably illegal to give to children. Port wine negus is very nice, but not exactly suitable with meat. Many children will drink water, or a little sherry and water.
Would you like a drink?
Sherry.
Sherry. Sherry?
Sherry.
Sherry.
Anyway, it does go on at length to describe what else can be made, including the very popular dish at supper parties, tipsy cake, which basically sounds like sponge cakes soaked in sweet wine. So between the claret, the champagne, the water and sherry, and the tipsy cake, perhaps the little darlings aren't going to notice that their main meal was tinned tongue. There's an article on how Christmas cards are made. There is an article on Christmas games for everyone, and this is again Phyllis Brown. Snapdragon is a game mentioned here. Once you've got the children properly drunk, it seems to be the best thing to do is add the extra exciting element of fire. When this pastime is decided upon, a number of raisins are put into a large, broad, shallow bowl, and a little brandy or other spirit is poured over the fruit. The lights in the room are then extinguished, the spirit is ignited, and the bystanders in turn plunge their hands through the flames and endeavour to obtain possession of the fruit. This, of course, is not easily done. It requires both nerve and agility, and the unavailing attempts of the company cause a good deal of fun. Added to this, the burning spirit gives a lurid glare which lights up the eager faces of the guests and has quite the weird-like effect. In the western counties of England, It is played under a varied form and known under a slightly different name, that of Flapdragon. In this game, a lighted candle is put into a can of ale or cider, and attempts are made to drink the liquor whilst the candle is burning. This is not done without the face either being blackened or slightly burnt. There's an article, How to Entertain at Christmas, and one of the suggestions is to see that there is an abundance of Christmas literature about. Servants and children, as well as the grown-ups, delight looking at pictures. A pretty, well-written story of Christmas happiness is wont to diffuse a sense of enjoyment among its readers. The glowing, freshly written pictures of the Christmas shops and the holiday people in the Christmas numbers of our magazines inspire us with a renewed power of happiness as each season comes around. There is an article about how to decorate the home at Christmas time, and the illustration shows good ladder safety protocols being observed when hanging holly wreaths and what have you from your stag's head. Some pages of Christmas poetry, and then from our Paris correspondent, an article on different types of fancy dress you can wear to a Christmas party. Jill. French dress from the 1780s. A lady of the 12th century. A fishwife. A page. A forester. And, a Moorish servant. Reading those through earlier, quite glad to see that only 2 of these costumes required your Victorian children to be put into blackface. Moving on to The Friendly Visitor, so a magazine with a bit more of a sort of a Christian bent. There's a story by Hetty Proctor, Mother's Christmas Present, where the actions of her children in raising a little bit of money make the Christmas for everybody. There is Stephen Clark's Christmas Carol, which is a short piece, but this is from Ellen Thornycroft Fowler, and it is showing that influence of A Christmas Carol, in that it just has to mention it, and we sort of know what the story is going to be about. But this is about someone who thinks he is a good person, so not a Scrooge figure who would admit himself that he is not the most generous of people at the beginning of the story, but this is someone who thinks he is doing the right thing, but has a dream, a reverie, where he is visited by a host of angels who show him that his Christian seeming actions are self-aggrandizing, and he's not really getting into the spirit of things, and he mends his ways. There is One Christmas Eve by Margaret Scott Haycraft, and after a couple of poems, another story from Margaret Scott Haycraft, or M.S. Haycraft as she is here, Cabby's Christmas Surprise. And these are 2 very simple tales, one of a good deed being rewarded, one of simple faith being rewarded with someone seemingly or thought was dead turning up. We then move to The Woman at the Home, Anne S. Swan's magazine. This is profusely illustrated. Annie S. Swan is my takeaway from this book. She's someone I want to read more of and about. She just seems to be pretty much a force of nature. Here she is editing this magazine. I think it wasn't the only magazine she was editor of. So popular did she become, so synonymous with The Woman at Home in particular, that it just became known as Annie S. Swan's magazine. She also wrote under the names Mrs. Burnett Smith, which is like sort of her married name, and David Lyle. David Lyle was the name she wrote under when writing most of her suffragist non-fiction. But from the fiction perspective, she wrote 200 novels and serials and stories from 1878 up until 1943. She was a prominent suffragist, never a suffragette, although she did get herself arrested along with a number of other Scottish women for throwing rocks through windows. She was a founding member and first vice president of the Scottish National Party. And during the First World War, when she pretty much ceased her literary activities and went full on war effort, she also travelled to America to advise the people in America of what the British were doing for this war effort, obviously trying to get the Americans involved in the war as well, and met with future President Herbert Hoover, who was at that point the chair of the US Food Administration Service, and basically advising him of how to make the food that they were producing go further. The selection of stories and articles from The Woman at Home also seem to have, I think, some of the best stories in this book. There is The Cry of the Curlew, A Christmas Story by Hidden Hill. And this is, so it's a bit melodramatic, but it is about a man who makes a pretty terrible mistake after supposing his wife is being unfaithful to him, and him learning a lesson. There is then another article of how to make Christmas presents for members of your family. There is more cookery. I'll skip this one because there is still more cookery to go, but hare soup, roast beef, boiled turkey, this all seems to be pretty much order of the day. It does also suggest some plain dinners for December. In the run up to Christmas, you want simple, plain fare before the big meal itself. So on Sunday you just have roast ribs of beef, potato, cabbage and apple dumplings, and then the following day pea soup made from the bones of yesterday's roast, plus minced beef from yesterday's roast, plus more mashed potatoes and ground rice pudding. Tuesday, even lighter, we're full on to the diet now. Stewed chops with carrots, potatoes, fried slices of ground rice pudding, the remains of yesterday's pudding, with red currant sauce. Wednesday, a white potato soup, roast pork, applesauce and baked potatoes. So, make sure you get both portions of your potatoes in the meal. Thursday, just a rice soup, some cold pork and applesauce and wintergreens and ginger pudding. Ginger pudding sounds quite nice. Friday, fish pie and stewed steak and onions and marmalade pudding. Marmalade pudding sounds even better than ginger pudding. Saturday, boiled mutton, mashed turnips, potatoes, fried sandwich pudding made from the marmalade pudding. Mutton broth, beefsteak pie, fried potatoes and baked apples, and all of that should give you enough space for the following day, Christmas Day, where you hear soup, roast beef, potatoes, cauliflower, plum pudding, blah 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 blah. It carries on. I'm feeling actually quite ill reading some of this. There is a lot here. But we follow this up with Percy Andre, A Christmas Ghost Story. This is really good as well. And so, a ghost story. I've read another Victorian ghost story, which is part of the resurrection event. I can't quite remember what it's called, but run by Vin at Revenant Reads and a number of others. So I quite like this story. It's not not a horrifying, overly spooky ghost story, but the ghost is performing a function here, and is acting pretty much as matchmaker. So I really enjoyed this one. Percy Andre starts off as a writer, moves to America, and becomes a brewer in Chicago and a prominent anti-prohibitionist, which is a bit of a career swerve, but one I can fully support. There is more cookery here, and the pudding for this is flame pudding.
4 ounces of butter and 4 ounces of cashew sugar.
And then when it's done, set fire to it as you would a Christmas pudding, and presumably then try to take bits of that pudding with your fingers whilst everyone laughs at you. Have a little game of Snapdragon whilst you do this. But the full Christmas menu here is mock turtle soup, sole a la Colbert, roast pheasants, boiled turkey, celery sauce, Brussels sprouts with cream, sirloin of beef, braised ham, Christmas pudding, mince pies, flame pudding, and apples a la Portuguese. I don't much go in for material that needs trigger warnings on this channel, but I'm going to give you a trigger warning here. Anyone of a queasy disposition, just fast forward 30 seconds. Mock turtle soup. Bone half a calf's head, blanch it and cook it for 2 or 3 hours in water and salt in it. Take out the head and press it till cold. Cut into small pieces, 1 pound of veal, 2 pounds of gravy beef, 4 ounces of lean bacon, 1 onion, 1 carrot, 1 turnip, 1 celery stalk. Put all these ingredients into a saucepan and fry them a light brown in 2 ounces of butter. Then add 4 ounces of flour and brown that also, and pour in gradually 3 quarts of good stock and 2 quarts of the liquor in which the head was boiled. Put in a bouquet garni and some peppercorns and salt and bring the soup to a boil. Skim it well and simmer slowly for 3 hours to extract all of the goodness out of it. At that end of that time, strain the soup and return it to the saucepan. Add a little lemon juice and the calf's head cut into neat squares, more seasoning if required, and serve very hot. There is then an article by Annie S. Swan of just, her and her friends talking over the teacups about the year that's been and the importance of Christmas, followed by possibly the most sentimental of the stories in here, and the most I'll say pathetic in the true sense, the very sad ending. This is How Dr. Davidson Kept His Last Christmas at Drumcogty by Ian McLaren. There is a little bit of impenetrable accent work going on here, but this is just a guy who seems to have done the right thing all his life in his final days. There is My Most Memorable Christmas by Gertrude Atherton. So this is a story of Christmas on the frontier, or in the upper end of California, sort of verging on Pacific Northwest. Gertrude Atherton is an American writer. She's another suffragist, but just in case you thought all suffragists were good people, if you were hoping for a white Christmas, you're in luck, because she also turned out to be a white supremacist. So the less said about Miss Atherton, the better. There is an eventful Christmas 65 years ago, which is a fairly entertaining little vignette, resulting in the death of many Belgian soldiers, but all in a festive cause. There's a short story by Annie S. Swan, Miss Bartram's Experiment, which is quite funny and Christmassy enough. There is yet another Christmas menu here. I won't keep going on about the Christmas menu. If you do want the recipe for ox tongue a la Belgravia, let me know. Just hit me up in the comments. Then we move on to the Strand magazine, the Illustrated Monthly. This has a lengthy explanation of how Christmas crackers are made. And to be honest, quite an operation it does seem to be. This one factory just seems to churn out almost all of the Christmas crackers needed in the empire. There is Christmas in the Forest, translated from the German, which is a fairy tale like story about the wolves and their magical goings on, and their interaction with a local forester's family. Horace Wyndham and Christmas in the Army, just an explanation of how the army celebrates Christmas, as you can imagine, in a very organised way. And then lastly, The Lady's Realm. The contributors to this magazine, which costs £1, so it's not cheap, include familiar names to any Victoberist. They have Marie Corelli and M.E. Braddon here, but also a few members of the nobility, Lady G. Ramsden, Sir Edwin Arnold, and the Countess of Cork. Most of what's here from Lady's Realm seems to be sort of shameless, just sort of advertisement pieces for department stores. The Parisian Diamond Company, the Arctic Lamps Company, Messrs Stockley and Sons. Although it does describe some of the shops in Burlington's arcade, which is still a very nice shopping experience if you like frippery and gaudiness. And lastly in this book, a bit more about cuisine and entertaining, and quite frankly the ridiculously inappropriate stuff people are feeding children. But even this can't entirely escape the product placement here. Don't just butter some slices of bread and spread it with the celery cream. Butter some slices of Hovis bread and do it. And I'll leave you finally with nouveauté sandwiches. This is what they're suggesting you give children at Christmas. Cut up some cold turkey, pass it through a mincing machine with 1/4 of the quantity of ham and 12 oysters. Pound together in the mortar, mix in some Velouté sauce with salt and pepper to taste, and pass through a fine sieve. Spread this mixture on the bread and butter and make it into sandwiches. A slice of aspic jelly placed inside each sandwich makes a still better relish. Merry Christmas. The lights in the room are then extinguished, the spirit is ignited, and the bystanders in turn plunge their hands through the flames and endeavour to obtain possession of the fruit. When this pastime is decided on, a number of races When this pastime is decided upon, a number of raisins are put into a large, broad, shallow bowl and